Good afternoon, Doc. Good afternoon, classmates. I'm Alan P. Miasco, and I will be your reporter for today. My report is all about the introduction of line graphs and how we create our line graph in presenting the data. In the report of Mr. Lukay, there are 4 kinds of graphic representation. So these are the bar graph, the line graph, the pictograph, and the circle graph. But today we will focus about the line graph. First, what is line graph? Line graph is done by plotting the frequencies with a dot at their midpoints and connected the plotted points by means of straight lines. In other words, the x-axis and y-axis intersect each other, bearing reasonable proportion with each other by plotting with a dot, and straight lines are drawn to connect the neighboring dots or points. Line graphs are used to track changes over short and long period of time. When the smaller changes exist, line graphs are better to use than bar graphs. Why? Because in bar graph, in presenting the data or in the graphical form, it should be in the rectangular, vertical, rectangle, or bar in presenting our graph. But in line graph, we will just plotted the points, plotted the dots, and connect the dots by straight lines to the neighboring dots. Line graphs can also be used to compare changes over the same period of time for more than one group. It is also useful for identifying patterns and trends in the data, such as seasonal effects, large changes, and turning points. Line graph is very important for the teachers in assessing students' performance to know the changes over time. It is done after you gather the data as summary of the assessments to locate and to graph the data you gather. Line graphs are common and effective in assessing students' performance because they are simple, easy to understand, and efficient, especially when you assess the changes of your students' performance. Then line graph is very helpful to use. So a graph has 4 essential parts. So these are caption, stub, reasonable proportion of data, the x-axis, and number 4 is body. The legend is used if there are 2 or more variables. First, what is caption? So caption described as the data shown. Draw attention to important feature contained within the figure and may sometimes also include interpretations of the data. Figures are typically read from the bottom up, so caption go below the figure and are left justified. The caption is placed below the graph representing the figure. So this is our caption. The figure 4.4 shows the line graph and the line graph of frequency and midpoints of assessment of student learning 2 test taken by 50 teacher education students in a certain state university in Metro Manila. Next is stub. The stub is the vertical column to the far left of a table or graph, in which you list the various line headings that identify the horizontal rows of data in the body of the table. Reasonable proportion of data, the x-axis. This is the important of the graph. The x-axis and y-axis should be proportion or equal. In making your data, it should be balance or proportion. The body is the information or data is the most important part of your graph. It contains line graph can present more than one group of data at a time. In this graph, only one set of data is presented. But if there is two or more variables or data shows in the graph, then legend is helpful to the readers to understand what they are looking at. This legend tells us what the line represents. So, in creating our line graph, we should look the table 4.6 as our basis, because in our line graph we will get the frequency and the midpoints. But first, in creating your line graph, you will create the vertical lines, which represents our y-axis, and horizontal lines, which represents our x-axis. And then the frequency, it should be in the y-axis. So in getting the frequency, we should be careful to plot the numbers in the frequency. Okay, in our frequency, the frequency is the result of our tally, and the frequency is the number of the students who got the average scores from the class limits. Okay, since 9 is the greatest number of students who got the average scores of 71 to 75, we will now arrange the numbers from 0 to 9. So we will start counting from our vertex, which is 0 to 9. So this is how we get our frequency. Now let's move on to midpoints. If you remember the report of Mr. Hamili, he teach us how to get the midpoints. Okay. In getting our midpoints, you will just add the lower class limits and upper class limits, and then divide it by 2. If you remember the report of Mr. Hamili, you will know how to get the midpoints. In our class limits, in 96 to 100, you will just add 96 plus 100 is equals to 196, divided by 2 equals to 98. 91 plus 95 is equals to 186, divided by 2 equals to 93. 86 plus 90 is equal to 176, divided by 2, 88. 81 plus 85 is equals to 166, divided by 2 is equals to 83. 76 plus 80 is equals to 156, divided by 2 is equals to 78. 71 plus 75 is equals to 146, divided by 2 is equals to 73. 66 plus 70 equals to 136, divided by 2 is 68. 61 plus 65 equals to 126, divided by 2, 63. 56 plus 60 is equals to 116, divided by 2 is 58. 51 plus 55 is equals to 106, divided by 2 is equals to 53. 46 plus 50 is equals to 96, divided by 2 is equals to 48. So that is how we get our midpoints. So now, since we already know how to get the midpoints, we will start from 48 up to 98. So we will start numbering from our vertex to 48 to 98. So the midpoints, it should be in the x-axis and the frequency in the y-axis. Now, let's move on how we graph or how we plot the dot in our line graph. So, in the midpoints of 48, there are two education students who got the scores of the average score of 46 to 50. So we will just put the dot that intersect in our y-axis and x-axis, just like this. You will trace the 48 and put into the number 2 in our frequency. That is how we put the dot. So it should be intersect with our x-axis and y-axis. Next is in the midpoint of 53. So there are 3 education students who got the average scores of 51 to 55. So 53 to 3. So these are the 3 education students who got these midpoints. Next, in the midpoint of 58, there are 3 education students who got the average scores of 56 to 60. So 58, then we will just put in our frequency in 3. Next is midpoint of 63. So in the midpoint of 63, there are 4 education students who got the average score of 61 to 65. Next, in the midpoints of 68, there are 6 education students who got the average scores of 66 to 70. So 68, then we will just put in the number 6 in our frequency. Next, in the midpoint of 73, there are 9 education students who got the average scores of 71 to 75. So 73 to 9. Next, in the midpoints of 78, there are 6 education students who got the average scores of 76 to 80. So 78, 6. It's right here. Next, in the midpoint of 83, there are 5 education students who got the average scores of 81 to 85. Next, in the midpoint of 88, there are 4 education students who got the average scores of 86 to 90. Next, in the midpoint of 93, there are 5 education students who got the average score of 91 to 95. Next, in the midpoint of 98, there are 3 education students who got the scores of the average scores. Next, in the 98, next, in the midpoint of 98, there are 3 education students who got the highest average scores of 96 to 100. 98, so 3. So, the next steps to do is to make or to draw a line that will be connected to the plotted points, to the neighboring points. So let's start in the 48 the midpoint of 48 and the frequency of 2, we will draw lines. You will just connect the plotted lines by straight lines, just like this. Okay, so this is how we get our line graph of frequency and midpoints of assessment of students learning to test taken by 50 education students in a certain state university in Metro Manila. So now let's move on how to get a line graph to your cumulative frequency greater than and less than. So in plotting cumulative frequency lesser than and greater than, the line graph differs from plotting the absolute frequency in two ways. First, plot the dots against the cumulative frequencies lesser than and greater than. Second, plot the dots against the upper class limits. So this is done to visualize whether the graph presents the number of cases falling above and below the particular values. Okay, now in preparing your line graph on how to get the cumulative frequency lesser than and greater than, we will look back at table 4.4 as our basis, and it is important in our line graph on how to get this line graph of cumulative frequency lesser than and greater than of assessment of student learning to test taken by 50 teacher education students in a certain state university in Metro Manila. Because without the table 4.4, you cannot trace or you cannot plot the dots if you do not know how to get the upper class limits and the cumulative frequency lesser than and greater than. If you remember the report of Mr. Gubalani in getting your upper class limits, you will start from step 1, which is find the absolute range, which is 50. Second, find the class interval, which is 5. In choosing class interval, it should be odd numbers. Third step is set up the classes. You just add 1/2 of the class interval and subtract 1/2 of class interval to the highest score of 98 as the highest class limits. After that, you will subtract 5 as class interval from the lower class limits of the highest class, which example 95.5 minus 5, so 90.5 up to the lowest score. So that is how we get our real limits. In converting your real limits to integral limit, you will just subtract 0.5 from the upper class limits and add 0.5 to the lower class limits. In your line graph, only upper class limit integral will be your x-axis. Now, in your cumulative frequency lesser than and greater than will be your y-axis or represent your y-axis. So, since there are the highest cases found in your cumulative frequency greater than and lesser than is 50, we will start numbering at 5, or we will number it by 5. So this is how we this is how we put a number. So from our vertex, we will start 5, then adding by 5 to the 50, to the highest cases of your cumulative frequency lesser than and greater than. So it should be 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. So that is how we get our y-axis. So in your x-axis, the upper class limits, which is 50, 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, and 100. So that is how that is how we prepare our line graph. If you remember the report of Ms. Hassim and Mr. Emily, they teach us on how to get the cumulative frequency distribution for lesser than and greater than. So in the cumulative frequency distribution for lesser than, you will start adding the individual frequency from the bottom up to the highest class limit. So in the frequency of 2 of 46 to 50 class limit, you will just copy number 2. Then in the frequency of 3 of 51 to 55, you will just add 3. So 2 plus 3 equals 5. Then in the frequency of 3 of class limit 56 to 60, you will just add 3. So 5 plus 3 equals 8. So in the frequency of 4 of 61 to 65 class limit integral, you will just add 4. So 8 plus 4 equals 12. So in the frequency of 6 of the class limit 66 to 70, you will just add 6. So 12 plus 6 equals 18. So in the frequency of 9 of the class limit 71 to 75, you'll just add 9. So 18 plus 9 equals 27. So in the frequency of 6 of the class limit 76 to 80, you will just add 6. So 27 plus 6 equals 33. So in the frequency of 5 of the class limit 81 to 85, you will just add 5. So 33 plus 5 equals 38. So in the frequency of 4 of the class limit 86 to 90, you will just add 4. So 38 plus 4 equals 42. So in the frequency of 5, in the class limit of 91 to 95, you will just add 5. So 42 plus 5 equals 47. So in the frequency of 3 of the class limit 96 to 100, you will just add 3. So 47 plus 3 equals 50. So that is how we get our cumulative frequency lesser than. Now, in the cumulative frequency distribution for greater than, you will start cumulating or adding from above up to the bottom. So you will just copy the number 3, the frequency of 3. In the class limit integral 96 to 100, you will just copy the number 3. Then, in the frequency of 5, in the class limit 91 to 95, you will just add 5. So 3 plus 5 equals 8. So in the frequency of 4, from the class limit 86 to 90, you will just add 4. So 8 plus 4 equals 12. So in the frequency of 5, in the class limit 81 to 85, you will just add 5. So 12 plus 5 equals 17. So in the frequency of 6, in the class limit 76 to 80, you will just add 6. So 17 plus 6 equals 23. So in the frequency of 9, in the class limit 71 to 75, you will just add 9. So 23 plus 9 equals 32. In the frequency of 6, in the class limit 66 to 70, you will just add 6. So 32 plus 6 equals 38. So in the frequency of 4, in the class limit 61 to 65, you will just add 4. So 38 plus 4 equals 42. So in the frequency of 3, in the class limit 56 to 60, you will just add 3. So 42 plus 3 equals 45. In the frequency of 3, in the class limit 51 to 55, you will just add 3. So 45 plus 3 equals 48. So in the frequency of 2, in the class limit 46 to 50, you will just add 2. So 48 plus 2 equals 50. So that is how we get our cumulative frequency greater than. So I hope you know how to get the cumulative frequency greater than and lesser than, because it is very important in plotting the dots in our line graph, because you cannot plot the dot if you don't know how to get this cumulative frequency lesser than and greater than. Now let's start plotting the dots in our cumulative frequency lesser than. So in the cumulative frequency lesser than, in the 50 upper class limits, you will plot 50 against 2 in our cumulative frequency lesser than. So in the y-axis, um, it is expected that there are imaginary numbers. So for example, this is 5. So possibly that number 2 is right here. So we will plot the dot 50 against 2. So right here. Then in the upper class limits of 55, you will plot the 55 against 5. So this is the 55 upper class limits. Plot it against 5 right here. Next, in the upper class limits of 60 against 8. So 60 against 8. So 8 must be here. So 60 against 8 right here. Next, in the upper class limit of 65, there are 12. So 12 must be here. So if this is 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So 12 is right here. So 65 against 12. Next, the upper class limit of 70, there you will plot 70 against 18. So 70, so 18 must be here, in the middle of 15 and 20. So 70 against 18, right? Next, the upper class limit of 75, you will plot 75 against 27 of cumulative frequency lesser than. So 75 against 27. So 27 must be here. So if this is 25, this is 26, 27, 28, 10, 29. So 27 must be here. And then 75. So right here. Next, in the upper class limit of 80, you will plot 80 against 33. So 80 against 33. So 33 must be here. 30 to 200 to 33. So right here. Next, in the upper class limit of 85, you'll plot 85 against 38. So 85 against 38. So 38 must be right here in the middle of 35 and 40. So right here. Next, the upper class limit of 90, you'll plot 90 against 42. So 42 must be here. Here. So 90 against 42. Next, in the upper class limit of 95, we'll plot 95 against 47. So our 47 must be here. So 95 against 47. And then in the last upper class limit of 100, you will plot 100 against 50. So 150 against 50. Now, our next step to do is to draw a straight lines that connect each dot or each neighboring dot. We will draw a straight line. Okay, this is now our cumulative frequency lesser than. Okay, let's move on how to get the cumulative frequency greater than. So in the cumulative frequency greater than, we will start from the upper class limit of 100 against 3. So 100 against 3. So 3 must be here. So we will plot the dot against 100 and 3. Next, in the upper class limit of 95, we will plot 95 against 8. So 95 against 8. So 8 must be here. So 95 against 8. Next, in the upper class limit of 90, we will plot 90 against 12. So 90 against 12. Next, in the upper class limit of 85, we will plot the dot 85 against 17. So 85 against 17. 17 must be here. So 85 against 17. Next, in the upper class limit of 80, we will plot 80 against 23. So 80 against 23. Next, in the upper class limit of 75, we will plot 75 against 32. So 75 against 32. So 32 must be right here. So 75 against 32. Next, in the upper class limit of 70, we will plot 70 against 38. So 70 against 38. Next, in the upper class limit of 65, you will plot 65 against 42. So 65 against 42. Next, in the upper class limit of 60, you will plot 60 against 45. So 60 against 45. Next, in the upper class limit of 55, you will plot 55 against 48. So 55 against 48. Next, in the last In the upper class limit of 50, you will plot 50 against 50. So 50 against 50. Okay. Now, the next step is we will draw straight lines that connect each dot or each neighboring dot. So we will start from the upper class limit of 103. Okay, so now this is now our cumulative frequency greater than. Okay, so remember class that if we draw straight lines, I will recommend that we will use our ruler because uh, ruler help us to make the dot or make our straight lines accurate and precise. And if you have also a graphing paper, it is also helpful for preparing our y-axis and x-axis. Okay, this is now our line graph of cumulative frequency lesser than and greater than assessment of student learning to test taken by 50 teacher education student in a certain state university in Metro Manila. So, in the cumulative frequency lesser than, the number of cases can be determined falling below to the particular scores. So in our cumulative frequency greater than, the number of cases can be determined falling above. So that is how we make our line graph in our cumulative frequency lesser than and greater than. Very important for the teachers to determine whether the score is falling above and falling below. So that's all, and God bless everyone.